Some object attributes have what are known as invariants. Invariants are restrictions on the values that I can assign to that particular attribute variable. To understand what I mean by that, let's look at an example. Here in the terminal, I'm going to create a point3 object. You'll notice in the constructor call, I have passed only integers. But if I look at the object that is created, all of the attributes are floats. If I look at p.x, it's 1.0. Okay, fine, let's just reassign it. And I'm going to assign to p.x the integer 4. Oh, but if I look at p.x, I'll notice that it's actually the float 4.0. That's because the invariant for the point3 class is that all of the attributes x, y, and z must be floats. If I assign something other than a float, well, Python's going to convert it. Okay, well, what happens if I assign it something like a string? Whoa, I just caused Python to crash. Python's pretty serious about these types of things. So for those of you who have programmed in something like Java, you might go, okay, this just means that attributes are typed variables, which is, okay, different than normal variables, but I sort of understand that. No, this is not the same thing. And to help you understand why, let's create another object. So I'm going to use another class that we haven't seen before, which is the RGB class. RGB stands for red, green, blue, and it's used to represent a color on your computer monitor. Every single pixel is a mixture of red, green, and blue light, and specifying the levels is how you define a color on your computer. Right now, I'm going to define black. That's just 0 for all of these values. If I look at the object, you'll notice that red is 0, green is 0, and blue is 0. There's also this alpha here, but we're not going to talk about that at all. Okay, well, red is the attribute. So if I want to assign red a value, I just, do it like this. And as you can see, I can assign integers to red. But if I try to assign a float, that's going to crash. If I try to assign a string, that's going to crash. Okay, fine. I understand that the invariant of red, green, and blue is that they must be integers. It's more than that. In color theory, the red, green, and blue values have to be an integer between 0 and 255. If I give it a negative value, then it also crashes. And if I give it a value that is too large, it also crashes. So it's not just the type, it has to be in range. What we're seeing here is that attributes are kind of like preconditions, right? We have typed preconditions and general preconditions. And remember what preconditions do in a function. As long as the preconditions are met, I can promise that the function works. If the preconditions are not met, I don't make any promises about the function. Objects are the same way, right? As long as the invariants are met, the object behaves normally. If the invariants are ever violated, then I say that the object is corrupted. And I use that word in exactly the same way as when we talk about a file being corrupted. Now, what's interesting here is, well, with function preconditions, that was just something that we put in our specification. Python seems to be a lot more hardcore here. It's actually crashing when I violate my invariants. We say that it is enforcing the invariants. That's not true of all classes. It just happens to be that the classes that are in intro CS that I've provided for you happens to enforce all of its invariants. Okay, if that's true, how do I know if a class enforces its invariants? And by the way, how do I even know about these invariants at all? Well, I know about the same way that I know anything. I read the documentation. Let's go to a web page here. We're going to the course web page for right now, and I'm going to go to resources. Remember, all of the classes that we're working with are inside of the Intro CS module. So I'm going to go to the documentation for Intro CS. Look at this, geometry classes, that talks about point3. Color classes, oh, that's where we learn about RGB. If we click on it, we see, RGB objects have 4 attributes, red, green, blue, and alpha. And for each one of them, notice it says the invariant. It must be an int, but not just that. It must be a value between 0 and 255. This is going to be an incredibly important class because it's going to form the crux of our assignment 3. So right now, it might be a good idea for you to look at this documentation.